Would you ask Mr. Maddison to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Maddison, you ready to carry on?
Yes,
thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maddison, we were on the subject of the AOVs, and I was in the middle of an email chain. I think we may be able to take this a little bit more quickly. Just in general terms, given what you told us earlier about your knowledge of the state of the AOV in September 2014, did you at that stage consider what interim measures should be put in place for Grenfell Tower, pending the full replacement of the AOV system?
The dialogue I'd seen with the fire brigade was that they'd recommended some working practices for residents to follow in taking care in their working practices at the beginning and the end of the day. And I'd also understood that the fire brigade had would have used smoke systems in the event of a fire, breathing apparatus rather.
Right, well, that's Ryden and the LFB. What about the residents? Did you consider what interim measures were needed to be put in place pending the replacement of the AOV system that would protect the residents?
My assumption was that the advice to residents would stay the same and there would still be a stay-put policy.
Right.
So there was no specific change in the advice necessary as a result of that, I assumed.
But the purpose of the AOV was to keep the escape route clear of smoke, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, but if the AOV wasn't working, what interim measures did you consider, if any, to be put in place to keep the escape route clear of smoke?
When you say the escape route, it was for the corridors,
the communal areas.
Yeah, the communal area, not the stair. Didn't affect the stair. I thought the stair was a separate compartment.
All right. So taking the communal areas then, to start with, what interim measures did you consider needed to be put in place, if any, pending the
I personally didn't look at that. I was would have taken the advice of the experts in that.
Right, I see. Did you consider telling all residents of Grenfell Tower that the AOV could not be guaranteed to work in the event of an emergency, in the event of a fire?
Not specifically, no. I did tell a number of residents who asked specifically that question, but not a general advice, because my understanding was the advice would have still been the same and stay put, in that the LFB would had different approaches that they would take in the event of a fire, and that Rydens had taken into account the advice of the LFB in terms of their working practices.
And now, just to pin you down a bit, if I may, you say you did tell a number of residents who asked that question. Who were they?
Well, I've seen in it's all on the record, correspondence with Mr. Defan, Mr. Awaderu, possibly Mr. Collins, I think, as well.
Yes, and I think it is right that there was, in the end, a response to the GTLA because they had asked the question. But do I take it from that there was not a full response to all residents in the building by way of a circular letter or something of that nature, telling them that the AOV system was not working?
I'm not aware of there being one. I mean, it may, if there was one, it would have probably been between Janice Ray and Claire Williams.
We haven't been able to find one. Can you explain why there wasn't one?
As I say, I would have been following the advice of the experts in this view.
You advised not to tell all the residents that there was no AOV system working?
No, certainly not. I mean, as I say, my assumption was that the advice that they've received, which was this is stay put policy, would still apply in the event that the AOV wasn't working.
Right. How would the state? I'm curious. How would the continued application of the stay put policy be an appropriate interim measure in respect of an AOV system which was designed to keep at least some part of the escape route clear?
My understanding was that the fire brigade, the advice was the residents should contact the fire brigade, and the fire brigade, so residents stay put, and that the fire brigade would use breathing apparatus to help. But I had no direct involvement in this. That was just my understanding based on the information that I've seen.
Did you ask yourself the question at the time? I wonder how somebody who does need to evacuate their flat because there is a fire in their flat will get through the communal area in the absence of an operating AOV system?
I didn't specifically think that. As I say, the people, that wasn't my direct area of responsibility. I'd be looking for the advice of the health and safety team, the fire risk assessor, and the fire brigade in these.
So you would be looking for the advice. Did you actually ask either your health and safety team or your fire risk assessor or the fire brigade the question I've just asked you?
Which was
how do people who need to escape from, how do people breathe in the communal areas if it's full of smoke, if they're escaping from their flats?
I didn't specifically ask that question, no.
Now, can I then turn to the topic of emergency lighting in 2016? You, I think, have dealt in your first statement with a complaint about this topic in February 2016, and I think I can shorten it by taking you to your first statement, please, at paragraph 105 on page 20. There are underlying documents, but it will be quicker, I think, just to show you your statement. You say here, there had previously been emergency lights on every other floor in the stairwell, but following a report from a resident, Mr. Collins, that they were faulty, we arranged for all the lights in the stairwell and lobbies to be replaced, and we took this opportunity to fit new emergency lights to every floor in the stairwell instead of every other floor. The new lights were installed by Ally Protection, I believe, at the time of the refurbishment works. This was in 2016, and all lights were therefore relatively new at the time of the fire. Now, that's what you say there. Can we look next at TMO 00840545? If we look at the first page, you'll see that these are the minutes of a Health and Safety Committee meeting dated the 12th of April 2016, at which you are present, as you can see from the list of names. Can we turn, please, to page 5 in this minute? We can see under part 6, or section 6 of it, that at 6.5 you raise a query. And the minute says this: PM queried how we put the fire strategy into practice. He gave an example of emergency lighting at Grenfell Tower, which had been taken down by the contractors but not reinstated. And this was not picked up for several days, despite a number of staff and contracted agents being on site in the interim. He emphasised the need for comprehensive training for all staff who visit site. BM acknowledged the need for a health and safety training programme, not confined to fire safety, to be implemented. Now, is this right? This was the first health and safety committee meeting after David Collins's complaint at the end of January 2016 about emergency lighting that we've been able to see. Are you referring here to the same incident with the emergency lighting here?
I think so, yes.
Now, in this meeting, you note, as we've seen, that there were staff and contractors on site who had been there but not picked up this problem. Was that because there was a broader problem with the maintenance of fire safety systems by TMO staff?
From memory, the emergency lighting in Grenfell Tower at that stage, at that stage before it was renewed, every other light fitting was an emergency light. So, and you could tell it was an emergency light because it had a little green or red light on it to indicate that it was charging. And Mr. Collins very cleverly spotted that those lights weren't on, so that the emergency lights weren't charging. So there was an issue. From memory, I think that's what the issue was. So my concern here was that other people who were doing regular inspections hadn't picked that issue up. So
yes.
I was questioning why, and making sure that people were alert to the issues that were there.
Indeed, and that provokes a reaction from you by way of emphasis of the need for comprehensive training for all staff who visit the site. My question is whether that statement by you there as recorded illustrated a deeper problem with the implementation of the fire safety strategy, not only at Grenfell but throughout the TMO stock.
I can't really comment on that, but I think that it's what I was keen to do is ensure that there was a culture of people taking responsibility for things, and Barbara Matthews shared that view. And this was about having an ongoing conversation with the team and people who are on site to be aware of things that aren't necessarily the reason they're in the building, or it's just trying to build a broader awareness and responsibility within everybody in the organisation.
Indeed. I mean, the reason I'm asking the question in the way I am, Mr. Maddison, is because the emergency lighting was used by you as an example of a more general point you were seeking to make, which was how you put the fire strategy into practice, which is how you start this paragraph, and you end it by emphasising the need for a comprehensive training for all staff who visit the site. And my question is, were you aware or alive to the fact that the fire strategy wasn't properly being put into practice?
No, I mean, and the last sentence there is saying not confined to fire safety. What I was talking about here was making sure that there was a culture in place in the organisation so that people took responsibility for all issues of health and safety, including fire safety in the organisation.
Who was responsible for introducing the health and safety training programme, which was, quotes, to be implemented, close quotes?
I mean, that would have been the responsibility of the health and safety manager.
Well, we have in the right-hand column the action identifier, and all. Did the all include you?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that all people at that meeting are able to put in place that action, and I, myself included.
Well, you've said a moment ago that it would have been the responsibility of the health and safety manager. Who was that at this moment?
Janice Ray. Janice Ray under the health and safety policy was responsible for training.
Do you know whether she did implement a health and safety training programme not confined to fire safety, which would nonetheless have picked up the emergency lighting example?
I don't recall.
Right. Did you follow up on it?
I don't remember. This may have come up at the next meeting, I don't know.
Was there any improvement in the maintenance of fire safety systems or health and safety systems generally after you had identified the need for a comprehensive training programme?
There was an ongoing discussion at this forum and at other forums about raising awareness of health and safety issues, ensuring people took responsibility and ownership, and escalated things if things weren't being done. And that was part of the dialogue that happened at these meetings, and that was led by Barbara Matthews.
Right. You say there was an ongoing discussion. Yes, that may be, but my question was different. Was there any improvement? Did it work?
It wasn't a specific thing that was measured in isolation. I think it was part of the whole fire management piece and the whole health and safety management piece in terms of how many actions from fire risk assessments were being actioned, etc., and how quickly they were done. There was a whole range of different aspects to this, and this was just one conversation about how we could raise awareness and hopefully improve matters.
Well, you see, you introduced this not as a general health and safety point, but as a fire strategy point, and you illustrate your concern about the fire strategy with the emergency lighting as an example. My question is, did you have any other concerns about the implementation of the fire safety strategy other than that illustrated by the emergency lighting incident at Grenfell Tower?
I don't think so, no.
Why did you say that it was an example? The note says you gave an example of emergency lighting. If that was the only one, why was it recorded as an example? I
just felt that it was always something that you could do better.
Can we turn then to the topic of floor numbering? Now, I'll show you what you said at Module 1 in your evidence to the inquiry first. Can we please go to the transcript for day 59 at page 142? And what I want to show you here is just a bit of evidence about the process, first of all. If you go to line 4 on page 142, you say if residents weren't happy about the way that those issues were addressed, they could either be escalated to the TMO and through the TMO's complaints procedure, or, so I think that was the process that was set up. And then you go on to say, so I think when you describe complaints, I think Ryden's role was about being the first point of contact on issues relating to the works. Now, we've already looked together at how the Grenfell Compact came to be recognised by the TMO, and we've looked also at the August 2015 matrix that Councillor Blakeman assisted the Grenfell Compact with, which you'll recall from this morning had a long list of issues in it, 28 in all. Let me just show you that again, and the email by which that came to you. Well, let's look at the email first. That's at MET3070923. It's the second half of the screen. Judith Blakeman to you, copy to other councillors. From Judith Blakeman, 28th of August 2015. Dear Mr. Maddison, I met with some residents of Grenfell Tower on Wednesday evening, 26th of August. I had prepared a matrix of the issues that had been raised so far, together with responses to date, to simplify and clarify where we currently are. I have since updated it in the light of further matters raised with me on Wednesday. I attach a copy for your information. The items in bold text are the new issues that were raised on Wednesday. To summarise, these are, and then if you go over the page to page 2, you can see that there's a long list of bullet points there. Now, can we then go to the issues matrix, which is attached? That's at MET3040986. MET3040986. And we looked at this morning. As you can see, it runs over some 3 pages, because if you go to page 3, you'll see there are some 28 complaints in all, 28 points in all. When you got the email on the 28th of August from Councillor Blakeman, did you open the attachment and see this document, do you remember?
I'm sure I did.
Yes. And if we look at page 2, go back a page to page 2, please, we can see that item 23 reads as follows: change floor numbers back to reflect current flat numbers and find an alternative numbering system for the 2 new floors, and then response in the right-hand column, which is a TMO Ryden response. Royal Mail requires the lower floors to be numbered so that the address is easily identifiable for the emergency services in the case of any incident. Floors have been renumbered and temporary signage fitted until the final version is available. The floor levels have been altered and it is not possible to revert to the old numbering. Were these concerns recorded in the TMO complaints procedure?
No.
Why is that?
So the issues that are raised on the matrix here, some of them are already resolved and some of them are easily resolved. They're not all complaints. These are lines of dialogue with the compact. And so I would develop that conversation with the compact.
I see. So some were and some weren't complaints?
I don't know that any of, I haven't read them all, but the ones I've seen, some of them, so for example, change the red lights on the lift to blue as a request for service, and we did it. And so it wasn't necessary to put it through the formal complaints procedure. And still a notice board, it's not a complaint, it's a request for action, which we did.
I see.
So I think most of the issues on here were fairly straightforward, routine type matters that could be quite simply addressed.
Right. Looking at number 23, do you remember who wrote this response? Royal Mail requires the lower floors to be numbered, etc.
I think that I probably provided the response into this document for Councillor Blakeman and for the compact. And this was discussed, I presume, at the meeting of the compact.
And it says floors have been renumbered and temporary signage fitted. Do you know who was responsible for putting up the temporary signage?
I assume it would have been Ryden's.
Do you know, or are you assuming?
It's a strong assumption.
Right. And what about the permanent signage?
So the
The permanent signage.
So the permanent signage would be Ryden's responsibility. That would.
Right.
So the issue here was that the original floor numbering was like a hotel numbering. So flat so flat 415 would be on the 4th floor, for example, and so and the Royal Mail. There was a conversation here between planners and the project team with Ryden's, and this alternative numbering came about as a result of that recommendation, which later transpired was a little bit of a red herring.
Was this treated as a priority, given that it was relevant for the purposes of identification for the emergency services in the case of an incident?
Was what, sorry, treated as a priority?
The problem, the change in the floor numbers, and the request to change them back to reflect current flat numbers.
Well,
Is that treated as a priority?
No, because we didn't agree to change them back. So the process that we've been through here is we communicated to residents what was proposed to be done, and it had been communicated to residents through the newsletter. And we did what we said we were going to do in that newsletter, which was change the floor numberings. And then several months later, through the compact, came the request to change it back. And we felt that actually changing it back would likely cause even more confusion than there was at that time. We felt that it was probably a change. This issue hadn't been addressed or raised at the time that we were consulting residents on doing it, or informing residents that this is what we were proposing to do.
Right. Let's just see how this then evolves. Can we go to TMO 10010093? This is an email chain in early October 2015. And if we go to start with, please, at pages 2 to 3, we can see that at the bottom of page 2 over to the top of page 3, Judith Blakeman writes to you and Claire Williams in respect of a number of concerns raised by the Grenfell Compact at a councillor's surgery on the previous Saturday. You looked at the top of page 3, see that's what she says in the first paragraph there. And she lists a number of issues, as she calls them, one and following. And if you go down, please, to the bottom of your screen, about halfway down the page, page 3, you see item number 6. And she refers to floor numbering and says this: they, that's the residents, continue to have an issue with the numbering of the floors, as do the ward councillors. Whatever the post office requires, the new system of numbering is not effective and could prove dangerous in the event of an emergency. The notices about the floor number changes are not prominent or secure, and in any case would not be helpful to children, anyone who does not read English, or indeed anyone with literacy problems. The solution the residents propose is that the lower floors should have a new name, such as Lower Grenfell. We believe that this issue does require some further consideration. And if we go up to page 1, we can see that you've added some comments at the end of her points. And you're writing back to Judith Blakeman here by way of response, and you take her numbering. Now, unfortunately, this version of this document doesn't show your comments in any differentiation, colour or otherwise, but you can see from item number 1 that you've added at the end of her paragraph, noted and agreed. You see that?
Yes.
So I can take it that I think these are your words. If we go down to the bottom of page 1 and look at paragraph 6, we can see that's where her query starts. And over the page to page 2, we can see you've added at the end, after the words does require some further consideration, you've written, we will review this again and come back to you. Just to confirm, those are your words, yes?
I think so, yes.
Did you, in fact, review that issue and go back to Councillor Blakeman?
Yes, I believe I did.
And what was the result of that?
We explained the rationale behind the changes in the floor numberings. There had been some misinformation going around the block that postcodes were going to change and flat numbers were going to change, and neither of those things were true. So we just wanted to clarify that point. Also explain that we'd taken the advice of the planners on this, and the planners had advised that the clearest way of numbering floors is to start at 0 at the bottom floor and upwards, rather than having 0 minus 1 or whatever, or named floors below, which in itself could be confusing. So we were trying to come across a solution which satisfied the. Well, I don't think we were going to satisfy either party at this juncture. We were in a position where we needed to try and put in place a solution and clarify what we were doing. But my concern was that we had consulted residents, informed them of what we were doing, had changed things, and felt that actually changing it back to the original would have confused matters even more. So we were in a tricky position at this time.
The complaint being made here was, in fact, as we've seen it, that the new system of numbering was not effective, as well as the fact that the notices about it were insufficient. What did you do about the notification that the floor numbers had now changed?
Well, the two issues, and the floor numbering is being effective. I mean, I think the system that we had put in place was clear. It was different, but it's a system that was being used on a lot of other estates as well, including in the TMO's housing stock. So the signage, we needed to get the permanent signs in place so that there was clear signage throughout the block that didn't fall off the walls or couldn't be removed easily, and that's what we did. So Janice Ray and Claire Williams worked at ensuring that the contractors put in place improved temporary signage, and ultimately put in place clear permanent signage. They also talked to the fire brigade to assess, to get their view and ensure that they were comfortable with that approach, and my understanding is that they were.
Can we go to RBK 30s 52621, please? This is an email some 2 months later, 1st of December 2015. When, as we can see, Councillor Blakeman emails Janice Ray and the complaints team and you with this. And she says, in the event that one of the emergency services receives an urgent call-out to attend to a problem in Grenfell Tower, such as a fire within a flat, how will they easily locate the address? There are no signs either beside the lifts or in the lifts to indicate the new floor numbers where the flats are located. The previous very sensible numbering system has, as you know, been changed, causing significant confusion, especially for visitors. If the emergency services had to attend a flat urgently, this is not helpful. Please do not just put up a temporary piece of paper setting out the new floor numbers. Each time this has happened, it has been removed. I'd appreciate a swift response. Now, when you received that, you obviously knew what it was about, because it related back to the discussion that you had told Ms. Blakeman that you would investigate 2 months previous.
Yes, but I think I would have responded on the issue of the floor numberings at the following compact meeting, I assume.
As a compact meeting, because we haven't seen an email or any message back to her telling her what the results of your review were and what decision you'd made about item 6 in the email of the 2nd of October we've just looked at.
I think it was discussed at the following compact meeting.
What was the upshot of that discussion, the result of
As I've described, that we felt it would cause more confusion to change back to the original numbering, and we're sticking with that approach, but we're going to get in place the new permanent signage.
Right. She says there are no signs, either beside the lift or in the lifts, to indicate the new floor numbers where the flats are located. Well, first of all, was that true?
I don't know. I would assume that that would have been checked by Janice, Claire Williams, and presumably the estate services officers who were responsible for ensuring that communal inspections were carried out.
Right. Let's see what happens next. If you go to RYD 3059989, this is the next day, 2nd of December 2015, and you can see the second email down on that page. Gary Martin of Ryden emails Claire Williams and Linda Prentice and others at Ryden, 2nd of December. Hi Claire, new floor numbers have been put up on the riser doors on each floor, complete with individual flat numbers and a directional arrow to show which direction they are in on exiting the lifts. I have also, a master sheet up in the lobby of the second floor. Also, the now incorrect floor numbers in the stairwell have been obliterated, and I will put some temps up in there also. I've chased our QS for the permanent signs, and it appears we're waiting for the instruction to go ahead. And for each sign's contents, we have the brand guidelines document. Were Councillor Blakeman's concerns registered as a formal complaint or inquiry within the complaints procedure?
I don't remember. I mean, her inquiry would have been, I presume, treated as a member's inquiry, and it was reported to the complaints team. So we asked Councillor Blakeman to ensure that all communication from her was done through the complaints team, so we could keep a clear track on all of the issues that she raised across the whole of the stock, and ensure that she got responses.
Right. The reason I asked that is that it looks from this email, and tell me if this is wrong, that Gary Martin took steps to remove the old, now erroneous floor numbering the day after Councillor Blakeman's second email, or the 1st of December email on this question. Is it right that action was only taken in response to her complaint at that point?
I don't know.
Were you aware of any guidance or regulations or advice that the TMO should follow for floor numbering within Grenfell Tower?
Sorry, in what respect?
Were you aware of any guidance or advice or regulation that TMO should follow when numbering the floors?
In respect to changing the numbers?
Yes. Or clearly signing?
Okay.
Clearly identifying the right floor numbers?
No, I would assume that there would be a responsibility to ensure that signage is clear so that people know which floor they're on.
Right. Can we go to TMO 100275592, please? This is an email on the 15th of December 2015. At the bottom of page 1 over to page 2, from Janice Ray to you, a copy to Barbara Matthews. And the subject is Grenfell Tower signage and responses to Councillor Blakeman. Hi Peter, further to the initial query from Councillor Blakeman on this issue on 1st December, she sent in a further email with a photo attached last Thursday, copy attached, just to confirm. As per your request, I asked the LFB station manager for North Kensington to confirm when his crews had carried out the last of their regular familiarisation visits to Grenfell, and he advised that this was undertaken on October 15th. I visited the block yesterday to inspect the current signage and fed back my comments, all relatively minor, to Claire, who's instructed Ryden to address them ASAP. Specifically, I noted, and then she explains what she's noted there. Now, if you look at the next email up, the same day, you asked Claire Williams to tell Ryden to complete the suggested actions that had come from Janice Ray. You say, Claire, can you please instruct Ryden to action all of these points by close of play Thursday? Please talk to me if there are any points that can't be resolved. And then you go on in the next but one paragraph to say, Janice, I will respond to Councillor Blakeman, thanks. Now, Janice Ray says, as I've shown you, that she contacted LFB on your request. Is that right? Did you ask Janice Ray to contact the LFB on this subject?
I don't remember.
Right. Did you ask Janice Ray to carry out the inspection she says she did carry out?
Sorry, when you say contact LFB on my request, that was, I think I asked her to get their view on the changes of the numbering, because I think that we had we were getting slightly conflicting information from different parties, planners, Royal Mail, and the Fire Brigade. And I think I was suggesting that Janice should check with the Fire Brigade about what they felt was the clearest way of ensuring that the floors are numbered accordingly.
I see. And she's telling you here that she had asked the LFB station manager when they'd carried out their last regular inspection, regular familiarisation.
No, I don't think that was the question. The question would have been, is this floor numbering protocol appropriate? Whereas that sounds like a different question to me.
I see. Well, that's what she says in her email to you. We don't see you going back to her in your email back to her saying you've asked them the wrong question.
No, I think there was a separate line of dialogue with the Fire Brigade.
Well, right. Why do you say that, given the topic of this email, which is signage and responses to Councillor Blakeman?
Because this is about signage. The other issue I was raising was about the floor numbering per se.
Right. Well, did you contact Janice Ray only after the Grenfell Compact had raised their concerns about the floor numbering in the August matrix of issues?
Sorry, could you ask?
Yes, I'll put it a different way. I'm sorry. It looks from what I've shown you so far that the concerns about, or you're contacting Janice Ray to investigate the concerns about the floor numbering only happened after seeing the August 2015 matrix, which had identified the problem.
Well, no, there's a previous position before that, which is where we communicated to residents in our newsletters that we were going to change the new flooring, and everyone had been informed of that. So we were basically acting on what we had informed residents we were going to do based on the advice we'd received from planning. And and it was only later through the compact that these issues were raised as residents not being happy with the new approach. So there was a bit of a lag in between. So we'd actually done it, and then we received the feedback from the compact that some residents weren't happy and didn't think it was a sensible approach. So I think there are two separate issues here. One is about the signage,
Yes.
and one is about the actual numbering and the protocol around numbering.
Yes.
So I'm getting confused in the question.
Yes, I understand, and I understand why you are. In relation to the signage, I think isn't it right to say that actually this is something that came out of the matrix of issues in August 2014, but was taken forward by Ms. Blakeman, Councillor Blakeman, in her October email?
I thought the matrix referred to the floor numbering per se, not the signage.
Exactly. So it evolved. The point evolved. What I'm suggesting to you is that the floor signage problem evolved from something which was already the subject of debate between you and the Grenfell Compact.
I don't know.
Looking at the email below on this page, Janice Ray to you, you can see in the second bullet point, the stenciling of floor numbers within the staircase stopped is effective but currently starts at the fourth floor. The lobbies in the stairwell below the fourth floor down to ground level should also be stencilled. This stenciling, did you know if this was intended to be a permanent arrangement or only a temporary one?
I don't.
Once the refurbishment was finished, whose role was it to ensure that the signage at Grenfell Tower was maintained?
That would be, well, through the defects period, Rydens would have a responsibility if there were some defective issues. On an ongoing basis, it would be done through the estate services inspections and responsive repairs.
And now I want to ask you some questions about gas, if I can. And I'm going to show you your statement, please, your first statement. First of all, at page 25, and you deal with this on block between pages 25 and 27 at paragraphs 134 to 143, and I won't read them all out to you. Can I just look at para 139 with you, please, on page 26? You say there, the National Grid advised the TMO that it wished to run gas pipes up the stairway. They considered this to be the only place to run the pipes as there was no feasible route to run the pipework externally. The TMO was powerless to prevent that as National Grid were the statutory undertakers. Legally, National Grid had the powers to specify how it wished to install its infrastructure. TMO were concerned by the proposals and needed reassurance and commitment from National Grid that what they were proposing was safe. And if we go on to page 27, you continue on this theme at paragraph 141. You say, following internal discussions, it was also agreed that Carl Stokes, the TMO's retained fire expert, should visit the tower to give us his view on the location of the pipework. Carl Stokes produced a report concluding that the location of gas pipes was not a problem per se, provided that they were fully fire-stopped. And then at 143, you say, the work of boxing in and fire-stopping progressed slowly and was the subject of many complaints by TMO to National Grid. I was aware that Anthony Cheney, who was acting head of contract management, assets and regeneration, and who reported to me at the time, was chasing National Grid on a very regular basis, but often his emails received no reply at all, or promises were made which were not kept. My understanding now is that some of the boxing in work may not have been completed by the time of the fire. Now, can I show you one particular complaint that was made by a resident? Can we go to CAD 403046? Now, this is an exhibit to a witness statement by Mr. Martin, and it's just disappeared. But this page, I think we need. And can we please go down to the foot of the email string, page 6. And here we have an email from Shah Ahmed, dated the 20th of April 2017 to Daniel Wood, copied to Robert Black and Councillor Blakeman, not to you. Subject, recent visit by the National Grid to my flat, ref, main gas pipe through my front door. Dear Mr. Daniel Wood, this is to inform you that this morning I had a visit from the National Grid without prior notice or letter, either from the KCTMO Home Ownership or from the landlord RBKC, that they have decided to put the gas pipe through my front door. The National Grid also tried to demonstrate the layout of the pipe, and I was extremely horrified and shocking of the layout. Let me reiterate that I find it unreasonable, unacceptable and unprofessional, forceful entry to my flat. I have no contractual agreement with the National Grid, but with my landlord as leaseholder. Let me categorically confirm that to the KCTMO, National Grid and you that we have no intention whatsoever that the main gas pipe coming through my front door under any circumstances and events. Please confirm. And now this, I think, is copied onto you, if you look above that, by Daniel Wood the same day. Do you see?
Yes.
And he just says, hi Peter, please see below. Any idea what's happened here and who would be best placed to respond? And then if you go up to page 5, you see that you go back to Mr. Wood, Daniel Wood, a few minutes later, or perhaps a little bit later that afternoon, to be fair to you, a few hours later. And you say, hi Daniel, there was a leak on the gas mains and National Grid have had to rerun a new mains throughout the block. National Grid would have to run the supply into residents' homes if residents want one. How this is done is a discussion that Mr. Shah will have to have with National Grid. It is not our responsibility. I will ask Anthony to reply to Mr. Shah along these lines. And then the address is given in the emails that then come through above that. I don't need to show you that. Now, the question I have is, did you ask National Grid to send you a report or a certificate to ensure or assure the TMO that the works, that all the gas work mains risers in the block were safe?
There was quite an extensive and complicated correspondence between the contracts management team and National Grid to try and establish what they were proposing to do. And it had gone on for some time. And our preference was that they remove the gas supply from the block. We felt that running the new gas supply through the block was unnecessary, and felt that they should buy out the residents and put in electric. It felt like the best way of avoiding running this pipe at all, but they weren't prepared to do that. And there was then an extensive correspondence between the contracts management team and National Grid to try and establish quite what they were doing, and to get confirmation that the works met the requirements. And we talked to building control, and we also got Carl Stokes, the fire risk assessor, to give an opinion on what was being proposed too.
You see, what I'm really after is, if you go back to page 5, and you say how this is done as a discussion that Mr. Shah will have to have with National Grid, not our responsibility. What I'm really seeking to understand is why you thought it wasn't the TMO's responsibility to ensure that whatever gas works or piping works were done within the building was solely the National Grid's responsibility to Mr. Shah directly, in respect of which you had no responsibility. Can you explain that?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
I'll repeat it. Why was it that you thought that it wasn't the TMO's responsibility to ensure that whatever gas works were done within the building was solely the National Grid's responsibility to Mr. Shah, and not the TMO's responsibility?
The National Grid were the statutory authority here. It was their supply through the building, and them being the statutory and the expert in this, I felt that they were responsible for carrying out these works in accordance with their regulations.
Yes.
They were the experts.
Given Mr. Shah's concerns about safety, why did you think that it wasn't the TMO's responsibility at all, but for something for Mr. Shah to take up directly with the National Grid without your involvement?
The issue I think I'm talking about there is that Mr. Shah, at the moment, at this stage, doesn't have a gas supply. So if he wants a gas supply, he would need to talk to the National Grid, who would provide him with the supply into his home. There was limited scope for where that supply could be run within the building, and that's what National Grid were struggling with, I think, here really, and came up with having to run it through the communal stairwell. But that was what they chose to do. Our only alternative our preferred alternative would have been that they remove the gas supply altogether and put electric in.
In relation to safety of the works through the stairwell, did you at any time seek some kind of report or assurance or certification from the National Grid, or Cadent in fact, that the works they were proposing were safe?
We got advice from building control and from the fire risk assessor, and there was extensive communication from the contracts management team and from Janice Ray in the health and safety team to National Grid to raise our concerns.
Is the answer to my question yes or no?
I'm telling you what happened.
Tell me it simply. Did you get any report or assurance or certification from the National Grid that the works they were proposing were safe?
I haven't had sight of all of the correspondence. That was between the teams that I've described.
And do you accept that it was the TMO's responsibility as the manager of the building to obtain or to be satisfied directly by an assurance from the statutory undertaker so that it, in turn, could reassure its residents?
So that was why we were asking for opinion from building control and from the fire risk assessor, raising the concerns that have been raised and trying to get clarification on that point.
And do you accept It wouldn't have been for Mr. Shah himself to obtain that direct assurance from the National Grid himself.
And I don't think that's what this is suggesting.
Now, let's go to another document, TMO 10017418. This is a copy of the response that you sent to Lee Chapman and Tunde Awaderu's complaint about the gasworks, which they made on the 6th of June 2017, only a week before the fire. And you can see it's come from Catherine Dack. But actually, if you look at page 3, it's come from you. And if we look at the actual complaint that's made, what you're responding to is it appears on page 7. Starts on page 7. It's dated the 23rd of May 2017. And then on page 10 is the actual complaint. If we go to the response that you send on page 1, under the rubric Stage 2 Complaint Response, various issues at Grenfell Tower, you confirm receipt of the complaint to the 20th of April. In fact, it had evolved since then. And then under gas mains located in the stairwell, you say this. You complain that residents are concerned about the health and safety implications of National Grid locating the new gas mains in the stairwell of Grenfell Tower. The correspondence from Sasha Jevons and Anthony Cheney has explained that responsibility for this work rests with National Grid, and they're responsible for ensuring the works meet necessary standards. KCTMO has reviewed the proposals with our fire safety consultant and with the fire brigade, who've confirmed that the proposals are acceptable. However, at this stage, the works are not complete, and National Grid are yet to complete the work to install a fire-rated boxing around the pipe. I would therefore propose to keep this complaint open until this work is complete, at which point we will review the works and take further professional advice to confirm that the installation is satisfactory. Did you, in fact, investigate the case?
Yes.
Now, it's right that Carl Stokes provided advice on the installation of the gas pipes. Did you see that at the time?
Yes.
It's at CST, I'll show it to you, CST 401240. And it's a letter of the 30th of January 2017. And there it is. I'm not going to read it all out to you. It's right, isn't it, as we've seen, I think, that the GTLA had asked for a health and safety certificate or reports confirming that the installation of the gas pipes was safe. We haven't seen that you disclosed Carl Stokes' letter of the 30th of January 2017 to the GTLA. That's right, isn't it? We don't think you did.
I don't recall, but maybe not.
No. Do you know why you didn't disclose Carl Stokes' letter?
I assume because we'd left that aspect of the complaint open and wanted to review the matter on completion so we could confirm back at that stage.
Right. Now, you refer to the fact that the LFB had confirmed that the proposals were acceptable. Were you aware that the LFB had told Janice Ray that they were not happy with the gas riser because it was in the means of escape?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Right. Let's look at TMO 10016548 then, please. Looking at this email chain, this is a chain of emails between Janice Ray and John Allen in early April 2017. I take it you didn't see these. But just looking at the first email on that page, 4 paragraphs down, Janice Ray is telling John Allen, LFB is saying, though not yet in writing, that they are unhappy about the riser being on the means of escape, but as it is already installed, not sure whether this will have any input. Perhaps she means impact. I don't know. Did you know that the LFB had said what she has recorded there as saying to John Allen?
I'm not aware,
Right.
but I mean, we were unhappy it was there as well.
Now, you referred in your email I've just shown you to keeping the complaint open until the work was completed. How would the complaint have been dealt with after the works were completed?
Well, in the complaint, I'm explaining the works that will be done as part of the National Grid works, and what we wanted to do was to have the opportunity to inspect that and get any views of any other authorities on that matter before closing the complaint. So we want to ensure that it was resolved.
If the subject matter of the complaint was the location of the works themselves, how would the complaint have been dealt with after the works were completed?
Because it would allow the complaint, allow the works to be inspected and assessed as to whether they meet the standards.
So you'd proceed with the works, finish them off, and then inspect them and see if they complied with the standard. Was that how you were thinking of it?
Well, no, the final piece of the works, as I understood at this time, was to install the fire-rated boxing around the pipework, and that work was underway, I understood,
Right.
and not complete.
So does that tell us that, in fact, although you say you were keeping the complaint open, you were only keeping it partly open? In other words, you'd already decided to keep the pipes in the stairwell, but make sure that they were boxed in properly.
If it was my decision now, I wouldn't have had the pipes there. I would have had the gas removed from the building altogether. So it wasn't my choice. This was something that the National Grid imposed, and they were inflexible around this, said this was the only place it could go. And we had no choice, really, in this matter.
I was really just seeking to understand how your complaints procedure was working. You said you would keep the complaint open, but in fact it's right, I think, and what you're telling us, that the only aspect of the complaint that you were keeping open was the question of the efficacy of the fire stopping around the boxing.
Yes.
Yes. Can I just ask you then finally, a final topic about the self-closer on flat 136? Can we look, please, at your first witness statement at page 28? You say in paragraph 148 there, this: there was also a concern raised about an empty flat door being left open over a weekend, and concern that there was no door closer working to close the door. The concern expressed was in relation to security rather than any issue of fire safety. This was investigated, and it was established that a Ryden contractor had worked in the flat following flooding from the repositioning on the HIU in the flat above and had left the front door open. The door closer was repaired and an apology was given. Ryden were instructed to ensure it did not happen again. Now, you're referring here, aren't you, I think, to a concern or issue raised by Edward DeFarn in relation to flat 136, which was next door to his.
Yes.
And that flat at the time was empty, wasn't it? It was void.
Yes.
Now, your evidence here, as we've seen it on the page, is that the door closer was repaired. Yes? That's what you say.
I think that's incorrect. I mean, I didn't check that the door closer was repaired.
Why did you say it was?
That's incorrect. I think that's been wrongly noted there.
Well, what should it have said?
The door was closed, and an apology was given. That was what was detailed in the response to Mr. DeFarn. So yeah, I apologise. That's a mistake in my witness statement.
Can you explain how that happened?
Yes.
How did you make that mistake? Can you explain why
I think my solicitors have drafted that wrong.
When you read this statement, I had assumed, perhaps wrongly, that you'd read it very carefully before signing it.
It's a very long statement. I'm sorry if I've missed it.
It is. To be fair to you, it is a long statement. It's 52 pages long. But you didn't pick that up.
I didn't pick that up, no.
Right. Can we look at Mr. Ed Defan's complaint then? TMO 00830-538, please. This is, that's the beginning of it. Can we look at page 7, please, in that email run, or document run? It's an email to you, email from, starts at the top of page 8. In fact, it's rather misleading. It looks as if it starts at the bottom of page 7. Actually starts at the top of page 8. And it's a long email to Fairly Cofidia of the 2nd of September, timed at 11. Timed at 16:51. You see that, and your response to him is on page 7. I
think this is his complaint.
His complaint is I've misled you.
This is his response to my response.
You're right.
To him.
You're right. This is page 8 is his complaint, 2nd of September, and page 7 is your response to it. Now, you say in your response, in the 3rd paragraph, I've investigated this matter and Ryden acknowledged that they left the door open in error and apologised for this mistake. The door was in working order and was able to be closed by pulling it shut. What investigations did you carry out into that complaint?
I spoke to Simon Lawrence in relation to the issues that were raised from Ryden's, and he confirmed to me that they'd left the door open in error, but they were able to close the door.
Did you speak to Mr. Defan?
I didn't.
Why is that?
I don't recall.
Now, you said here that the door was in working order, but you said in your statement, as I've shown you, that the self-closing device required repair. You've now said that that part of your statement is an error. When did you first discover that that part of your statement was an error?
It's the first time I've read it.
Right. How did you conclude at the time, 2nd of September 2015, that the door was able to be closed by pulling it shut?
Because that's what Simon Lawrence told me.
Right. If we go to TMO 00830-538, please. At page 8. Which is what you're responding to.
No.
No, you're right. This is what he is responding to, I think.
This is his response to me.
His response to you. He starts by saying, Dear Ms. Cofidia, I would like to complain to you that Mr. Maddison from the TMO has responded to my concerns with regards to the front door of 136 Grenfell Tower being left open over the weekend of the 17th of August with a complete pack of lies. In Mr. Maddison's email to me, he claims that the front door was not broken and was simply left open. This is just not true, and it would appear that he has not taken the time to read my explanation of what happened when I first found the door to be open. As I explained in my original complaint to the TMO, I tried pulling the door shut, and it was broken. I made this point perfectly clear when I phoned the out-of-hours team and when I informed my neighbours and local councillors. Maybe Mr. Maddison is calling me a liar. I would like to ensure that his complaint is taken to level 2, this complaint is taken to level 2, and that the TMO apologise for lying to me and get their contractor Ryden to tell the truth and admit the door was unable to shut and therefore remained open all weekend. I'm also completely dissatisfied with the investigation that Mr. Maddison conducted with regards to the totally unacceptable response that I received from the out-of-hours team and would like the conduct of the worker and the response of the TMO on the night of the 28th of August to be properly investigated. Now, I've read that to you at some length. Did anybody at the TMO, within the TMO, ask you about the complaint?
I'm sure if it was considered at the next stage, they would have spoken to me about it. I don't remember who that was. I don't remember the conversation.
Did anybody specifically ask you to tell them what you had done to satisfy yourself that the door closer was not broken?
I don't remember that now.
Can we look at page 9, please, in this email run, which is the complaints team's response on behalf of Sasha Jevons. To Mr. Defan. It's the second part of the page on page 9. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it's from the complaints group or complaints team. And it says in the second half of the first paragraph, I have investigated the matter and consider that Mr. Maddison's assessment of the situation was correct and that the door of 136, I should say, was in working order and was able to be closed by pulling shut. I therefore do not uphold your complaint. Did you play any part in writing that response?
Not that I remember.
Not that you remember. So it's possible, is that right, that you might have done?
No, I don't.
Right.
I don't think I did.
Do you know who it was who actually investigated?
I don't.
Do you know what they did?
I don't.
Do you know what the factual basis was of the statement that your assessment was correct?
I don't.
The complaint was escalated to stage 3, wasn't it?
I don't know.
You don't know. Do you remember whether anyone from the TMO asked you about anything to do with the stage 3 complaints process in respect of this complaint?
I can't remember.
Did anybody from the TMO actually inspect the door at any stage of this complaints process?
I don't know.
Did anybody speak to Mr. Defan directly about his complaint during this complaints process?
My role was to deal with the stage 1 complaint, which I did, and I think that's the extent of my involvement.
Did anybody carry out any independent investigation into this complaint?
As I say, my knowledge and understanding is just dealing with stage 1.
Given Mr. Defan's evident extreme upset at being contradicted on a matter he had himself observed at first hand, do you remember whether any steps were taken, either by you or anyone else at the TMO, to meet Mr. Defan and explain to him why you considered that his observation that the door closer was broken was wrong?
I'd explained my understanding from my investigation at stage 1 by talking to Rydens. I'd explained that in writing to Mr. Defan. That was the extent of my involvement here.
And have you changed your evidence about the door closer needing to be repaired that we saw in your statement, having heard Mr. Defan examined on it?
I don't see what I would have heard that would have made me change my evidence.
But identifying the fact that it was repaired rather indicated that it was broken and that in fact you were wrong at the time.
No, my statement was wrong. I had no reason to believe that. My expectation was that as that property was empty, that it was Rydens were working in there because there'd been a flood from above, and any works to that door would have been done as part of the voids work to that property. So that would have been dealt with through Repairs Direct as part of the void problem. So it wouldn't have been dealt with as part of Rydens or any of the works Rydens were doing in that property.
I feel bound to suggest to you that when you said that in your statement that the door was repaired, that was true, and that was true because it was broken earlier.
I don't know. I didn't inspect it. I took it face value. I was in a position where I had Mr. Defan saying one thing, I had Rydens saying another, and there didn't seem to be any way that I could resolve those two. It didn't seem like an issue that I couldn't see any alternative way of resolving the impasse between the two views. What I did was apologise for the door clearly shouldn't have been left open over the weekend, and I passed on that apology. I certainly didn't call Mr. Defan a liar.
Yes. Mr. Maddison, thank you. I've come to the end of my prepared questions,
Right.
Mr. Chairman. It would be appropriate then to take, I think, the afternoon break and the question break at the same time, and perhaps have a slightly longer afternoon break.
Well, I was going to suggest we could break for 20 minutes this time.
Yes, and if we need more time, because I appreciate it's been a long
Well,
time.
then I hope there won't be a request for even more time.
Quite. Well, one never knows. But I'll come back to you if I need more time. But
Yeah,
great.
all right. Thank you very much. Well, there you are, Mr. Maddison. Mr. Millett's got to the end of what he thinks he needs to ask you, but as you know only too well, there may be some further questions. So we'll break now until 3:30, and then we'll see whether there are more questions for you at that stage.
Okay.
And as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Right, 3:30 then, please. Yep. Would you ask Mr. Maddison to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Maddison, we'll see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Yes, just one or two, Mr. Maddison. Can we get back to the topic of the flat front door at flat 136 and go back to where we were, which is TMO 00830538538 at page 9, which is the response to Mr. Defan about his insecure front door observation, where we were. And I read to you the last sentence or the last but one sentence of the main paragraph there. I'll just read it to you again. It says, I've investigated the matter and considered that Mr. Maddison's assessment of the situation was correct, and that the door of 136 was in working order and was able to be closed by pulling shut. My question is this: if it had to be pulled shut, did you not realise at the time that it was no longer a self-closing fire door?
This wasn't my response. This is the response to the stage 2 from Sasha Jevons.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's use yours then. Let's go up to page 7. This is your email in response to his on page 8.
Yes.
And the fourth paragraph, you say in the second sentence, the door was in working order and was able to be closed by pulling it shut. Did you not realise at the time that if a door had to be pulled shut, then its self-closer was not working?
It didn't specifically occur to me at the time, but in the context that this was an empty property, so it was going to be refurbished, and part of the void standard was to check the door closer. So my assumption would have been that any work required to the door would be done as part of the void works.
Right.
So at this stage, I'd understood the complaint was about it had been left open and potentially vulnerable to antisocial behaviour. The short-term solution to that was to close the door, which is what Ryden did, and then my assumption would be that the door closer and any other issues would be dealt with as part of the void works.
Nonetheless, did it not indicate to you that this was a flat which had a front door which wasn't a fully operating self-closing door?
I mean, that, in hindsight, yes.
Right.
But we don't know the cause of that door closer being not working or disabled. And my assumption was that it would be repaired as part of the void works.
That was your assumption, was it?
Yes.
Did you take it up with anybody? Did you go to Janice Ray and say, urgently, we have a flat front door with a closer that's broken, it needs to be sorted out?
Well, it would have been dealt with as part of the void works.
It would have been. Do you yourself know that it was?
That wasn't my area of responsibility.
Did you take this to somebody else? Did you take this problem to the people doing the voids work, copy to Janice Ray and say, here is a flat front door that is not compliant with the fire safety strategy?
No, I didn't. I knew that it was covered in the fire safety strategy that door closers would be addressed as part of void works.
Now, I asked you some questions last week about the report into health and safety prepared by Matt Hodgson in 2013 for the TMO. Do you remember that exchange?
Yes.
We will look, please, at TMO 1003124. That's the report itself. I'll just put it back in front of you to refresh your recollection. There it is. And this was discussed, wasn't it, at an executive team meeting in August 2013. Do you remember that?
I don't remember it.
It's the following month. But let's look at the minutes of it. It's TMO 008999807. This is the first page. You were not at this meeting, which is probably why you don't remember it being discussed at it. But I want to ask you something about it. If you go to the foot of the page, you'll see the topic, point 1.4, Health and Safety Report. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says, although there was a lot of operational action in the report, it did not help us with the organisational structure, stroke management. And then it says this, Peter Maddison was concerned that the fire risk assessments were substandard and could put the organisation at risk. There was also some concern that high-risk blocks were being classified as low risk and vice versa. However, the fire brigade had approved our processes, but there was a concern that A&R, that's assets and regeneration, of course, that were being bogged down with actions which were not addressing the situation. It was agreed to set up a meeting with Matt Hodgson, Peter Maddison and Janice Ray to discuss the way forward. Peter had suggested that he take on responsibility for all areas, including asbestos and fire risk, which were still with Janice Ray, and Janice Ray would have a more strategic role and work with the fire brigade. The possibility of Adrian Bowman transferring to A&R to be considered so that Peter Maddison could resource this area of work. Governance would be the reorganised Health and Safety Committee and also the A&R Health and Safety Group, which Sasha Jevons would review and chair herself. Matt Hodgson's report to reflect this structure. Any actions from the A&R Group to be referred to the Health and Safety Committee or Executive Team. And then you see the action people are SJ and AP. Now, you weren't at the meeting, as we've seen, but do you remember making the executive team aware of the concerns about the FRAs that you see reflected in this minute?
Yes, and I think it was there were some of the concerns that we discussed last week relating to the processes, and so I think they're quite consistent.
Why did you say that the FRAs were substandard?
They aren't my words. These are clearly third-party words.
All right. They are third-party words, but they clearly reflect something that the people who wrote the note or were at the meeting understood from you. Were you concerned at the time that the fire risk assessments were substandard?
I was concerned that some of the actions weren't easy to interpret. So they were actions to go and investigate rather than actions to go and do. And I wanted them to be more precise so we could streamline that process of allocating the works to contractors and getting the actions dealt with in the quickest way possible.
Did you express the view that the fire risk assessments could put the TMO at risk?
I don't think they were my words, but I think it's true. If the fire risk assessments weren't being managed effectively, they would create a risk.
Do you know how your concerns, whether your concerns as expressed here were addressed?
The proposal to make the changes to the team that were suggested here weren't put in place.
No.
So
what happened?
They were clearly considered by Sasha and Anthony Parks, and my understanding was that there was a decision made that they wanted to be separation between the delivery teams and the health and safety teams, and that structure was maintained.
Right. So the upshot of this was that this didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
No, as I think was clear from last week. But you nonetheless did express, according to this note, concerns that the fire risk assessments were substandard. Such as you had them, were you ever satisfied that the concerns, as had been reflected here, were addressed in any way?
I think a lot of progress was made in improving the situation. It was always something that needed to be improved, and it did. And some of the documents and the figures that we looked at last week showed that there was a significantly improving situation.
Right. So you say this wasn't taken on by your department?
Not by my department, by the executive.
Right.
So,
can we go to TMO 00849798? Now, this is a minute of the executive team, 18th September 2013. And we can see that you, in fact, are not present or in attendance, but you do actually appear at it to address the meeting on A&R matters. If we go to item 2, please, on page 2, it says Peter Maddison attended for this item and made a presentation. An overview was given on the work that was required, health and safety compliance, and the project plan for each area. You see that?
Yes.
And if we then turn to page 6, please. It continues. This is all under your presentation. And on page 6, at the top of the page, the last bullet point down, it says the clienting of fire risk assessments had been taken over by A&R, which were due to be completed by mid-October. I've assumed that it was you who presented that item. Is that right?
Well, that's not correct. No, I didn't minute this.
No, I know you didn't minute it, Mr. Maddison. I was just wondering whether it's right that it accurately records this as part of the presentation you gave, which starts on page 2.
No, we had no role in client in the fire risk assessment.
Well, looking then at page 5, you can see that this bullet point I'm putting to you falls under the heading timescale for compliance. Do you see?
Yes.
And fire risk is the second of those topics, Q1 2014. Yes?
Yes.
And you can see in the bullet points below that, second bullet point down, it says, however, we could be at risk if something went wrong, i.e. at Grenfell Tower. We'd carried out a fire risk assessment, but 1 year later, another inspection discovered that none of the actions had been carried out. Unfortunately, this information had been conveyed to the Grenfell Tower Action Group. Are you sure this isn't something that you presented on?
None of those are my words.
Do you know whose they are?
The person who minuted the meeting, I assume.
Well, let's go back to the attendees at the top of page 1, please. Present are Robert Black, Yvonne Birch, Sasha Jevons and Anthony Parks, with Angela Bosniak, Shekarez and Jane Clifton in attendance.
Jane Clifton would have taken the minutes, but they're not.
Right, but can you tell us who it was addressing the meeting on those matters if it wasn't you?
I could have been presenting something to the meeting, or Sasha may have been presenting something that I prepared for her, but those minutes are inaccurate. I mean, and because I would only go to an executive team meeting for a discrete item, I wouldn't have the opportunity to correct any minutes, so I wouldn't have seen the minutes.
Right. Can you help us understand what it means when it says clienting of fire risk assessments had been taken over by A&R?
I can't, because it doesn't make any sense, because it didn't happen.
Okay. Just give me one moment. Something I need just to check. General question. Did you ever consider providing the fire risk assessment reports to Grenfell Tower residents when responding to their complaints about fire safety?
Which complaints about fire safety are you referring to?
Any?
If it had been relevant, I mean, not many of the complaints were specifically about fire safety. In fact, I'm struggling to think of which ones were about fire safety.
Well, the AOV, the floor numbering, gas risers. We've been through them today.
So none of them would have been. I mean, what we did in each of those instances is got a report from the fire risk assessor, rather than which was a more bespoke response on that issue from an expert, rather than giving a broader, more dense document such as a fire risk assessment. So I think we did listen and communicated to residents. Was precisely. I also did similar things in the dialogue with David Collins in relation to the relocation of the HRUs, and I got several reports to address his concerns responding to fire safety issues. So no, we didn't. I didn't specifically give the fire risk assessment, although we did. The 2012 one was communicated to Mr. O'Connor.
It was.
But what we did is procured more precise legal, technical reports from our fire risk assessor to respond specifically to those questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Maddison, I only have one more question for you, and it's the question I think I asked you at the end of Module 1 in relation to those matters. But looking at all the matters we've covered during the course of your Module 3 evidence over the last, what is now 2.5 days, is there anything, looking back on it now, that you would have done differently?
I've tried to be as candid as I can over quite an extensive dialogue over the last couple of days. And I mean, my answer is that I would have done anything and everything possible to have avoided this tragedy. And I really think about it every day. That's all.
Well, Mr. Maddison, it remains only for me to thank you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our Module 3 questions. So thank you very much indeed for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Maddison, it's right, I should thank you on behalf of all of us on the panel for coming here for a second time to give your evidence. And I know it's taken rather longer than you were originally led to expect. I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot of material to cover. And we're very grateful to you for giving so much of your time. It's been very helpful to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Millett. Well, that's it for today, I think, isn't it?
That's it for today. And tomorrow we have Miss Grange, who will be asking the expert, Mr. Sakula, I think is the right way of pronouncing his name, some questions on the subject of cladding.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, we'll do that at 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please. Good. Thank you.